I grew up in the Midwest, United States. During the 90s, my family lived in a tight-knit community, and we would often have get-togethers and barbecues with our neighbors. It was truly the American dream. My brother and I were very good friends with all the kids from our neighborhood, and whenever we'd have one of these gatherings, all the kids would get together for a game of manhunt. To avoid any of the back and forth of who would be chosen as the hider and the seekers, my brothers and I would usually volunteer to be the seekers. There was this giant forest area outside of our neighborhood where the games would take place. And since we would often go fishing with my dad around this area, we knew it pretty well. You could say we were all very competitive. I remember it was the 4th of July, 1996. The entire community threw a party at the neighborhood park. And of course, this meant that we kids were going to have our traditional game of manhunt, one of the biggest we've ever had, and it would take place after the fireworks show. By the time the fireworks stopped, I'd say it was around 9:30 p.m. Shortly after, we gathered everyone for a game and began around 9:45. Things started out like any other game. We caught most of the low-level hiders within the first 10 minutes. However, there were still some of the older kids hiding out in some of the more obscured areas of the park. We were always told never to go too deep into the woods. To give you some perspective, the park we were at was at the very back of our neighborhood. Beyond that was the forest that went on for about 3 miles before you got to the highway that led into town. There was no hunting allowed in this forest because of its proximity to residential areas, so we would often see a lot of deer and other animals roaming about. Anyways, the game went on for a while longer, and despite their best efforts, we apprehended most of the hiders, except for a girl who was about 8 years old. We'll call her Ashley. I found this to be very odd because Ashley wasn't the best hider. We made our way to the small lake besides the clubhouse. This was the last area we would check before letting someone know that we couldn't find Ashley. It was about this time that I began to feel this sinking feeling in my stomach. I was only 11 years old at the time, but I could tell there was something wrong. I distinctly remember seeing the moon reflecting brightly upon the surface of the water as we made our way around the lake. When we got to the far side of the lake, we started hearing a strange noise coming from within the trees. It sounded like someone was being brutally stabbed over and over again, but no screams were accompanying the awful sound. The three of us approached the tree line. When my brother pointed his flashlight into the trees, we saw a hooded figure with its back turned to us. They appeared to be kneeling down and stabbing at something with a large hunting knife. As soon as the beam of light fell upon the figure, it immediately stopped what it was doing and stood up. The next thing I remember is my oldest brother covering my eyes with his free hand and telling us to run back to the park. The three of us took off and ran towards the party. I remember hearing the sounds of thudding boots tearing through the bush behind us. And as soon as we got back to the party, my older brother told my dad about the man in the woods. The rest of the night is a blur to me. I only remember seeing the police showing up, and me falling asleep in my dad's arms. The next morning I was told that Ashley ended up leaving with her parents while the game was still going on, which explains why we couldn't find her. I didn't get a good look at what the hooded man had been stabbing at, but my brother told me it was a deer carcass. Looking back, I suppose we could just chalk it up to someone hunting in a restricted area. But there's still something that bothers me. What kind of person rapidly stabs at a dead deer in the dark? And even though he was nowhere to be seen by the time we got back to the party, I'm certain that he was chasing us, at least for a short distance. It makes me wonder what he would have done if he caught us. That was the very last game of Manhunt our neighborhood ever played.